So we continue really where the commissioners left off, because the topic of our panel actually combines the two threads that you heard about from the two keynote speakers, privacy and antitrust competition. I'll just very briefly introduce the distinguished speakers. You can also see their titles on screen. Sitting next to me is Julie Brill. Julie is the Corporate Vice President and Deputy General Counsel for Global Privacy and Regulatory Affairs at Microsoft. And she was also, she is also a former commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission, so a former regulator of both consumer protection, privacy and data security, and antitrust. Sitting next to her is Michal Halperin. Michal is the Director General of the Israel Competition Authority, so Israel's antitrust commissioner. You've all met Commissioner Rohit Chopra. And sitting next to Commissioner Chopra is Dr. Tehlia Shwartz Altshuler, who is a senior fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute. So last night I looked at the market cap of the largest companies in the world, Julie, and so, like Commissioner Chopra said earlier, he mentioned 7 of the top 10, but actually the top 5 companies in the world today by market cap are, starting from the top, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. All 3 of these are around $1 trillion in market valuation, and I think each one of them crossed the 1 trillion. Microsoft, as of yesterday, is the only one above the 1 trillion mark, but I think all 3 of them sort of ventured into that territory over the past couple of months. So Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google's parent, and Facebook. Those are the top 5. And immediately after them, there's Berkshire Hathaway, but then Alibaba and Tencent, so 2 other tech companies from China. These are extraordinary times for the tech industry. For those of you who stayed up very late last night and watched the first debate of 10 of the 20 candidates in the Democratic primary, heard Liz Warren, who's a very viable candidate to win the Democratic primary and maybe become president of the United States, talk in the first debate about breaking up big tech companies as one of her top sort of signature policy initiatives. Senator Booker also weighed into that and supported doing it, although he focused not just on big tech. And this notion, this concept actually has support across the aisle, interestingly. Senator Hawley from Missouri, I think, and others have expressed support for it. This is a time when it seems like tech firms are suffering death by 1,000 cuts because there are congressional committees, multiple congressional committees investigating them in U.S. Congress. The FTC and DOJ actually apportioned the responsibility for dealing with 4 of the top 5 big tech companies. EU regulators, data protection authorities, and competition authorities are holding investigations. The media, there's a frenzy about it. At the same time, the big tech companies continue to feature on the best places to work for, the most coveted employment opportunities. Cities are fighting for Amazon HQ2, and countries are bending over backwards trying to attract the presence of big technology companies, and this country specifically is no exception to that. And I'll say that consumers too appreciate the incredible value and allure of the products and services and innovation that the big technology companies have brought us. I think it's safe to say that this is the most popular consumer product in the world, and many of the services are incredibly beneficial to society at large. So with this setup, I want to start with you, Michal, and ask you, in light of what I just said, what Commissioner Chopra said, what is the role of antitrust and competition policy in the digital era in markets where the rating price is free?
Thank you, Omer. Thank you for this introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me. And also, thank you for putting competition in Cyber Week as one of the issues to be discussed. This is very important to look at both issues together. So it's really a great honor to be here this morning. The subject of digital economy is for sure one of the biggest challenges that competition authorities around the world are facing nowadays. It's something that is in high level debated among all competition authorities, and Israel among them. And there is never, I don't think there is even one global conference or a global gathering where these issues are not discussed and are not deliberated and debated. So this is, of course, the upcoming issue, and I think all competition authorities and antitrust regulators understand that this is a new challenge that they will need to be facing in the coming future. So we are not in any different position in this, and it is very important to understand that not all competition regulators have the same views on the issues. They differ very much. For example, the EU view on this issue is very different than the United States view on these issues. It comes from a different legal system, a different culture. There are some cultures that are more tolerant to IP. There are some cultures that are more tolerant to a privacy violation, and there are some cultures that are more sensitive to it. So there's also a cultural issue, and of course we cannot avoid that there are also political and economical interests that are in that comes into the plate and also influence the general views that different regulators have on this subject. There is no doubt that one of the issues that should be discussed and should have high profile is interaction between privacy and competition. And here I want to discuss with you today the decision that was given by the Bundeskartellmat, which is a German competition regulator, the competition authority, regarding Facebook, which I think is the best example of where competition and privacy interact and how they relate to each other. So the decision, which is very innovative in any level, was given last February by the Bundeskartellmat, and what it said was that Facebook cannot combine users' data across its platform or collect data from third parties, a website or a related website, and combine them together to have a more general and more condensed information on its users. So what does this really mean? What happens today is that Facebook, of course, when a user uses Facebook, Facebook collects the data according to its uses. It collects its photo, it collects its like, it knows everything that a user does on the Facebook itself. But what happens more is that Facebook uses also information from other platforms. Platforms in which it owns itself, especially WhatsApp and Instagram, the most famous two subsidiaries of Facebook. So if you use Instagram, they collect the data from your Instagram account to be used in your Facebook account. And if you use WhatsApp, they collect the information from your WhatsApp account to be used in the Facebook account. And even more, what Facebook does is use third parties' data, and third-party platform in order to collect more data. So for example, if you enter your Airbnb account through Facebook, which is possible, then they will probably collect all the data you had in Airbnb. And if you use tools like Facebook Login or Facebook Analytics, then they are allowed to collect data from these sites and use it on your Facebook account. How do they do it? They use when you enter the account in Facebook, they usually ask you to tick the box on your consent on their privacy policy, and that is how they get your voluntary consent to use this data. So what the German authority decided was that this practice violates the European data protection principle, and even more so that it violates competition law standards, that this constitute an abuse of dominance by Facebook. And therefore, the Bundeskartellmat prohibited this behavior. It did not prohibit Facebook to use the information collected on the Facebook platform itself. It just prohibited the use of other platforms in the Facebook platform. What's important to understand here, there are a few important points that we should emphasize on this decision. The first one is that Facebook was decided to be a dominant company in its market. This is part of the German decision. The second important thing is that the decision put in the center of it the issue of data and data protection. And that's a huge innovation in the competition analysis. And the third thing that is very important is that the German authority used the privacy standards as a standard for abuse of dominance according to competition law. So what it decided is that the relevant standards for competition violation is the privacy standards imposed by the European Union. And this is also a very important aspect of this decision. Now, this decision, of course, is under judicial review, and the courts did not say the last word yet, so we're all expecting to see what will happen with this decision. But there are two main critics that I heard so far on this decision. The first one relates to the subject of the decision. The critic goes to say that the subject of the decision is more about privacy than about competition. And what really happened here is that the German competition authority went to protect privacy issues, and that was really what the privacy protection authority should have done. And the only reason that it wasn't left for the privacy protection regulator to do was because the privacy protection regulator in Germany is weaker and less effective, so it left the job for the competition regulator, but it's really not their job to do so. So that's one critique. The second critique comes from the more competitive analysis, and what it says is that the German competition authority really stretched what is considered abuse of dominance way beyond what is customary according to competition analysis, because not every unfair conduct or unfair behavior is an abuse of dominance. In the classical competition arena, we usually see abuse of dominance when a monopoly or a dominant firm try to put aside their competitor or eliminate them from the market, or if they try to leverage their power in one market to get control of another market. These kinds of behavior are seen in the competition analysis as abuse of dominance, but much less so any unfair conduct which is really unrelated to competition. So these are the two main criticisms that I heard so far on the decision, but of course the last word will be of the judiciary system. I'll stop here and go back.
Thanks a lot for that short tutorial about the German decision. I just want to say I'm not sure as a factual matter the extent of data collection by the platform is exactly as described. For example, when you use Facebook Connect, Facebook doesn't actually collect the data from your activity on the target site like Airbnb in your example, but clearly these platforms have very broad reach in terms of data collection. Julie, you've been on both sides of this divide, both industry and regulator, and both privacy and antitrust. Microsoft also owns a lot of properties like LinkedIn and Skype and Xbox and Azure and, you know, and the basic sort of traditional products. Should privacy and data protection figure into competition analysis like the German case held?
Sure, thank you. So first of all, thank you also, Omer, Jules, Limor, everybody else who's been involved in pulling this group together. It's really an honor to be here. As Omer alluded to, not only was I a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission during the previous administration for 6 years, prior to that, I was a regulator of competition, privacy, and consumer protection at the state level in the United States for 20 years. So I spent 30 years in government. I'm relatively new to Microsoft. Indeed, in one of my prior roles, I sued Microsoft over competition issues. So it's super interesting to now be inside the company and to understand how deeply the antitrust issues that it faced 20 years ago have been embedded in the culture of Microsoft. When you mention, I just have to say this, when you mention the top 3 firms by capitalization, I just want to say something about that. You know, our CEO, Satya Nadella, has been really clear that if anyone in the company goes around saying, wow, we're the top capitalized company, they're like going to be out. I mean, it is so much not what we are focused on. It just so happens that we are, along with other tech platforms, at that top of the list. But the tech platforms are actually, the tech companies are actually very, very different. So to take a line from James Carville, a Democratic analyst and a person who worked with a Democratic Party in terms of elections and whatnot, instead of it's the economy stupid, I think we need to really be thinking about it's the business model stupid. I mean, really, these companies have very, very different business models. And when it comes to competition issues, you have to look at the business model. And you have to really analyze what the effect of that business model is on the competitive landscape. So before I talk about the German decision, which I do view somewhat differently than was described, I mean, I think the outcome is absolutely what you described, but I think the reasoning for it is a little bit different. I do think it is absolutely critical that the antitrust authorities take into account privacy issues and take into account consumer welfare issues that are not just price-based. And I think that actually has always been the case. I think the FTC has long taken the position that we're not just going to look at, pronoun confusion. They will not just look at effect on prices, but we'll look at the effect on consumer welfare overall and the extent to which, whether it's a merger or whether it's a monopolization case, there is an impact on consumer welfare, which can have non-price effects like privacy, like innovation, lots of other non-price effects that need to be taken into account when it comes to competition issues. So it's not surprising, that, number one, it's not surprising for all the reasons that Rohit mentioned in his opening remarks, that the competition authorities are being asked to, and indeed are looking more broadly than they traditionally have done. When I was on the commission, all of my dissents were about competition issues. I don't know if you ever knew that. Every single one of them was that the agency was not moving aggressively enough in the competition space by taking a look at some of these, what I'll call non-price effects, as a competition regulator would say. Privacy being one of them. So it is understanding that people are asking the competition agencies to do more. They have the tools to do more. They should do more, and I think that's what we're going to see in the coming years. I'm happy to talk about the Microsoft case and what its effects were. You mentioned it, Rohit. I absolutely agree with Rohit that had the Microsoft case not taken place 20 years ago, we probably wouldn't see Google now. I mean, we wouldn't see a lot of other players that rose and then fell, because what the court ultimately did, although it was asked to break up Microsoft, it didn't do that. But what it did do is it took a very good scalpel and said, here are the rules. You're going to have to separate out the browser and your search engine. And once you required that separation, it allowed for entities to enter the market in both of those areas. And that was super effective, as we see today.
And Microsoft is stronger for it too, I think.
I agree with you, but I think Microsoft is stronger for it we may disagree about the reason. I will say I agree with you. I think the reason is because Microsoft is a very diversified company right now, from Azure to Xbox to LinkedIn to Bing and Edge and and Office, of course, and Windows. I mean, it's really diversified. And I think that's the lesson it took from the antitrust days, is that it really needed to sort of broaden and look at complementary areas as opposed to just sort of driving in one particular area. But we can debate that. Let me turn to the German case real quick. So the German case is super interesting, and I do agree that obviously the decision was that the German authorities took into account the way in which Facebook was engaged in privacy violations and said that that would be a competition violation because of its dominance. I don't think that decision is going to translate into any other market. And the reason I don't think it will translate into any other market is because there's actually a provision in German law that allows the German competition authorities to take into account privacy violations, not privacy effects, but privacy violations. In almost every other jurisdiction, I can't speak for the Israeli law, but in Europe, in the United States, and in the other major markets, what is required is that there's a causal effect between dominance or monopolization and the effect on consumer welfare, or what I'll say is non-price effects, including privacy. In the German case, there was no causal connection between the two, because the law simply said that the competition authority could take into account privacy violations. That case would have been the exact same, I believe, had Facebook been a smaller entity. I actually wonder if it would not have been the same had Facebook not been dominant, to be honest with you. I don't know. I can't answer that. But the German law is different in this regard. So in most jurisdictions in the United States, for instance, there will need to be a causal connection between the monopolization, we don't talk about dominance, and the privacy or non-price effect. Why do I think the Germans did this? I actually think that there were other reasons. I'm not going to disagree with you about the reasons that you mentioned, but I think in addition, the The reason I think that they drove this case as hard as they did is because had the German authorities said, well, there is a privacy violation, we have the right to consider that in the competition sphere, but we're going to defer to the privacy agencies because it is really their remit. Had they done that, I don't know if it was the weakness of the privacy regulators. They actually don't think of themselves as being very weak, so we could debate that. I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying there's probably a conversation to be had about how weak or strong the German privacy regulators are. But had there been a deference to the privacy regulators, they in turn would have had to defer to Facebook's lead authority in Europe, which is Helen Dixon, the Irish regulator. And that would have meant that Germany would have lost any voice in this issue. I think that realpolitik, the reality of the way in which the privacy laws are working in Europe had a big impact on why the competition regulators moved forward. You saw the same thing in France, where France drove very hard in terms of a decision involving Google, while Google did not have a lead authority and issued its decision like the day before Google finally announced, yeah, we actually do have a lead authority and it's going to be Ireland as well. So that's my read of the German case. I think it's super interesting. It is on appeal. It's one that we should talk about, but I don't know that it's going to translate well elsewhere.
Great, Julie, really great analysis, and I'll actually turn it over to you, Commissioner Chopra. Obviously, U.S. law, the Sherman Act, Clayton Act, didn't have privacy or data protection as specific items that an antitrust authority should weigh. But, like Julie said, there are non-price effects, and that does come into the equation. So whether it's a monopolization case or actually merger review, and we've seen this come up before in the Google DoubleClick case way back, should the commission weigh the effect on privacy? What is the effect on privacy? How do you even weigh that in a monopolization or merger case? And I will even challenge and say, maybe for privacy's sake, it's better to have one party that holds the data as opposed to a fragmented industry. Look at the Lumascape for AdTech, for example, where data is shared and actually transacted with on data exchanges and sold to the highest bidder.
So let me take the first question, which is that I think we need to think about, at a first order principle, we need to start rethinking the definition of the word free. So we often think that we are just getting all this free stuff through the digital economy, which is not true. There are many things that we pay for that we use methods other than currency to do that. And in many cases, we are paying with supplying our personal data, which is then monetized. We always use the word free, but in fact there is a transaction, there is a condition for consuming that service. So when we think about data and privacy, I would actually argue that this is about both price and non-price. So when it comes to price, obviously a competitive market would provide these services at the lowest cost possible, and even if it's a non-currency cost, they would be providing it at the lowest amount of data collection required. So a competitive marketplace would actually compete down the amount of data that a consumer must pay in order to consume. So that there's price. There's also quality. I think we sometimes think privacy is this strange regulatory concept. It is one of many dimensions of quality. So naturally speaking, we are going to want products and services that are more secure or that better protect our privacy compared to ones that will jeopardize our security and privacy. It is difficult to sometimes quantify that difference, but it is generally a consumer preference that we prefer more data protection than less, all other things equal. So the question then becomes is the market working if there is not a race in terms of quality? And privacy being one of those quality metrics. I mean, we make this seem like it's very complicated. You know, if we have two pizza shops in a town and they merge with each other, we don't just worry about the price of pizza going up. We then worry there's then going to be bad pizza because there is not the quality competition either. So I think we need to think of data both in terms of what consumers are paying, but also the quality effects that they get. Now, you raise a kind of question about, would we be better off with just one entity when it comes to everything? You know, you could make this argument across many domains of our society. Wouldn't it be better if we just had one bank? Or wouldn't it be better if we just had kind of one market participant across segments of society? And I worry that we can come up with rationalizations as to why that's the key. But in technology, I would rather solve those issues through technological innovation in terms of how the market and technology are advancing in ways that we can protect data no matter how many entities are touching it. The ability, I'll share a quick thing from U.S. competition policy history. When we started having mobile handsets, the natural standard procedure in the way the market worked was you had a telephone number with your mobile phone. And if you wanted to switch to a new carrier, you had to change your phone number. So this was actually a real way that you were locked in. Now, our communications regulator implemented a regulation saying that when you move, it's not the carrier that owns your phone number, you own the phone number. And you can take the phone number and put it into a new carrier. And guess what? You know, competition soared, prices went down, and new features developed. So we should also start thinking about data in terms of who has control over it, who can revoke access to that data, who can grant access to that data as we think about a competitive market structure.
Thank you, Rohit. Tehlia, I want to ask you just straight out, given these previous opinions, is privacy and data protection law anti-competitive? And the reason I think it's coming up from the previous comments, if you look at some of the privacy laws today, so for example, the biggest one on the agenda is CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's a law that's very much focused on not selling information. It's a do not sell law. Commissioner Chopra was talking about competing down the non-monetary price of a product, in this case, the data price. And I think an entire industry would argue that that is exactly what the ad tech industry is currently doing on data exchanges and through demand-side platforms and supply-side platforms, reaching an equilibrium on this price, and that privacy laws like the CCPA and like the GDPR will actually thwart this competition and empower the big, what we call first parties, the big data platforms, who have all the data, they don't need to buy it. So therefore we'll have an anti-competitive effect. What do you think about this statement? Is privacy law anti-competitive? And Julie, I want to hear your opinion also.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm going to do what I usually do on television interviews when I get a question I wasn't meaning to answer. I'm going to tell you let me refer to what I want to refer first, and then I'll get to your question later.
But I want you to answer the question. So this isn't a political interview on
I totally agree.
Chadashot.
No, absolutely. Let me refer to first of all to the issue that was raised just before about the German decision, the German Beckete decision. I think this is a great example. The fact that the theory of harm was that Facebook is abusing its dominant position by conditioning the access to its social networking services on users' consent to a limitless collection of their personal data. This is a fascinating example for me for the artificial gluing of competition law and privacy law. And I think that before we start talking about the interconnection of those two legal areas, we need to define first what we are protecting. And if we don't do that, I think that's going to be a major issue. So for me, we've seen enough by now to conclude that antitrust, specifically its pegging competition to consumer welfare, defined as short-term price effects, is unequipped to capture the architecture of the market power in the modern economy. Okay, so we've been there. That's fine. There's also no need to bear any words regarding the data and privacy crisis all around the world. Fine. This is also fine. But still, competition law is the only instrument in the legal armor that constrains the exercise of power by private company. So the intersection of privacy law and consumer and competition law should become an inevitable focal point. But the claim I wanna make here is that we need now to adopt some kind of a more holistic approach between competition law and data privacy rules. And in the center of this approach, before we start talking even about the anti-competitive possibilities of data protection, we need to ask ourselves what should be the center of this holistic approach. And I think there should be a new concept of the harm, triggering, let's say, triggering the interpretation of competition laws doctrine. And for me, it cannot be only the individual consumer harm, because what was mentioned before is either consumer protection issues of privacy, or the question whether data protection would harm competition and would enhance the power of bigger competitors. And I think what we need to do here is, first of all, to create a better constitutional theory for privacy, because what we've been concentrated on here is privacy as control. That's GDPR, that's consumer protection side of data law. It's really great, but I think the fact that we do not recognize that data as control rights, for example, the right to be forgotten and the right to and other consumer rights, I think the fact that we do not recognize that this is a laundromat, and until we do recognize that this is a laundromat, we are going to have a huge problem. So what I'm trying to suggest here is to look at the right to privacy not only as an individual right, but rather as a collective one. You've mentioned democracy before. You've said processing of data and ad targeting and so forth can create, let's say, traps on our autonomy. If this is true, and this is not going to be done only with, let's say, services or all kind of selling goods, but rather with ideas, with democratic elections, then the story that we tell ourselves about democracy is a false one. And if this is true, then maybe before we start even talking about all this combination of data protection laws and competition laws, we need to ask ourselves whether competition laws are equipped with the right tools to actually look at the right to privacy as a collective right. And here, just one more sentence before I sum up, I think here we have what to learn from previous competition decisions about traditional media markets. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but there is some kind of resemblance because it used to be two-sided markets, and because there was economies of scale and a natural tendency towards monopolism and so on and so forth. But there was another issue there. The traditional media was also a precondition to the exercise of a democratic society. And if we do not understand privacy as a precondition to the ability to exercise a democratic society, we're going to continue this discussion about privacy as control, but we are not hitting the core of the issue. Because the elephant in the room is not necessarily the size of the company. The elephant in the room is the question, what can be done with the data and who should control this? Now, it can raise lots of political issues. I admit that. I'm not sure that competition authorities are well equipped politically with the tools to exercise such a thing. I also think we need to expand our political imagination with regard to the rule of antitrust law, if we want to grasp it this way. But for me, any other, I would say, approach actually ignores the elephant in the room.
Okay, thanks, Tehlia, for these comments and this challenge, really. And I'll ask you, Julie, to reflect maybe on my question of whether whether privacy is anti-competitive, and then maybe turn to you, Michal, to wrap up, because we've heard a lot of comments which you started, and address this challenge that Tehlia is presenting to you, I guess, as an antitrust regulator, to, it sounds to me like, solve all of democracy's ailments. So, Julie.
So I thought your question was super interesting, and I think that it in many ways gets at the core of the problem that we're facing now in terms of the tension between privacy and competition. It is absolutely the case that the California law favors some business models over other business models. I'm going to go back to my point that I tried to make a little while ago. It is the business model stupid. Sorry, I don't mean to call you guys. No, but I do believe that the California legislators that enacted the California law were very well-meaning, but did not focus on the unintended consequence that the law will have by favoring those entities that are what we call in the United States walled gardens, have a ton of their own information, don't need to share with others in order to be incredibly effective in terms of reaching consumers and being able to surface information that they want and also to target advertise to them, versus those entities that don't have those kind of stores of data on their own and need to share with others in order to be competitive in the marketplace. So I think that the CCPA is very much focused on, as you said, requiring certain controls be placed on the sharing of data, but none of those controls exist with respect to those entities that don't have to share data but are doing the same thing. So it's not business model neutral. That is one of my big concerns about CCPA as it currently exists. GDPR has also been criticized about having anti-competitive effects, again, unintentionally, but that it is much easier for these, again, we can call them walled gardens, but really, truly any consumer-facing entity that is either dominant, depending upon your view, or beloved by consumers is another way to perhaps say it, that they have a much easier time at getting the kind of consent that GDPR requires in order to use data. So that, but let me just get to what I think is the actual tension that we're going to face going forward. And I know you want to move on, but I think this is important to say. Currently in the United States, in order to determine whether or not an entity is using one theory of sort of a value and doing it in a way that is anti-competitive, the regulators need to demonstrate that it is pretextual. That is, that you have a player that is dominant and is saying, we're going to do X, Y, and Z for privacy, for security, for whatever, for interoperability, but it's pretextual, and therefore we can go after them for competition violations. And we saw that in the Microsoft case, where Microsoft said, we must tie the operating system, the browser, to the operating system, because otherwise it won't work. And the court said that was pretextual. I think the problem we're going to face more and more is that these platforms are going to actually be driving privacy and security solutions, to your point. The bigger they are, perhaps the better they can protect privacy and security, or they're going to shut down access to their stores based on security and privacy concerns, as we're seeing now. And it's not pretextual anymore. They're actually trying to drive privacy and security solutions, but it will have a competitive effect. So what is the solution going to be there? And that's where I think the true tension arises. And I don't think we have a solution in the United States for that. And I don't think we have a solution that I'm aware of around the world for that true tension where it's no longer pretextual.
Great. That, I think, calls for a response from you, Commissioner Chopra. But Michal, first, I do want to turn to you to maybe react to pick up on all of these comments, and I just want to say we've been sort of laser focused, and I think naturally, on the platform side, but it's not just the platforms. So for this idea of anti-competitive effects of privacy, think about the publishers also. So, there were stories in the press that the New York Times, as a response to GDPR, cut off behavioral targeting and still didn't see any diminished advertising revenue, which, is almost to be expected if you're at the New York Times, the biggest publisher in the world, and you actually have paid subscribers. But the whole business model was set to prop up the long tail, the small publishers, the small advertisers who wouldn't have this matching of minds without the engine, the fuel of the internet economy, which is data-driven. So I think not just for the platforms, also for the publishers, the advertisers, does privacy law create a competitive advantage for large players. So, Michal, with this and any of the other stuff that was said.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, I want to completely agree both with Julie and with Rohit about the fact that competition analysis is not only about price and about price effects. It's about many other things too. And I want to be completely clear, when we analyze a thing from competitive point of view, we don't look only on bringing low prices to consumer. We also look about quality, we look about variety, we look on innovation. There are many other aspects that we're looking into when we analyze competition issues. And this is very important because I have to say that all the zero price market issue is not completely new. It didn't come in for the first time when the digital platforms came into the playground. We know it for many years. So, for example, in Israel, we have a newspaper called Israel Hayom, which is distributed for free. And this is not new at all. It's very traditional industry. The TV channels are giving to the consumer for free. And it happens a lot in a two-sided market where one party gets a service for free. And so the analysis is not new, and we are used to doing it. So I completely agree that when you talk on the broader analysis of competition, when you bring in issues of quality and variety and innovation, there is a place to put inside the privacy issues too. And maybe there will be a day when we treat privacy as the new currency that we analyze. We're not there yet, but leading on what Chopra said, echoing it, if, maybe we will there will be a day where we will analyze a merger according to the amount of additional data that can be taken from consumers as a case to block a merger. Usually today we see it more like a efficiency and less like a harm to competition, but maybe one day we will look at it differently. Maybe we will look at how deeply the merged company use the data, how much they take out of it, how much they analyze it as something to be considered in a merger analysis. This is now looks to me a little bit like a fortune teller, but it might be a day where we will look into it. What makes it, in my opinion, a little bit more complicated than what we discuss here at the table is that when we talk about price, it is very clear that we all want cheap and we all want low price. But when it gets to privacy, not all of us treat privacy in the same manner. And in fact, it is my strong personal impression that this is a generation thing. We, the dinosaurs, the people that are totally irrelevant anymore.
Not Rohit. Not Rohit.
Of course. Didn't try to say that. You're included. But
He's the new generation.
I, the dinosaurs, which is, I treat privacy, I give privacy a lot of importance, but I have 4 kids. Their age range between 24 and 10, and they do not agree with me on privacy at all. They use all those platforms. They know exactly well that they have no privacy at all. I keep telling them, you know that they know everything about you. And they say, not so much, not so much, but...
It does matter to them. This contradicts any poll that you do among youngsters. They are aware of their privacy and they know how to control it.
But, a mother is a little bit different, but... I mean, they're totally... Yes, they do, but... they're totally unconcerned about their privacy. They weigh their privacy completely different than us. And I think this is something that we should take into account. I do think it's an age issue. And this puts a lot of complexity into a competitive analysis that should be kind of objective when we approach it. The last thing I would like to refer is to Tehila's approach on how competition authorities should treat democracy. I think that Tehila and I have a traditional disagreement on the ability of the competition authority to preserve democracy and whether it's the main goal of the competition authority to preserve democracy. I think Tehila always try to debate that it is. I usually think it's not. And as so far, I would be well enough with a challenge to keep competition as it is and not keep democracy.
Okay. Keep competition small. Again. Just a couple of quick reactions. First, I want to echo what Tehila just said. Survey after survey, Pew and others demonstrate that young people care about privacy just as much as, sometimes more than our generation. They have to play with the cards they're dealt, so they need to come up with strategies to deal with social media and other tools that are available today. But there's no diminishment in the interest in privacy. Commissioner Chopra, so a lot was said. I want to hear your reactions because it's not just Tehlia. You also, in your keynote speech, put up, the lofty ideas and principles of democracy and free speech as being in the space of a competition authority. And maybe also if you can react to your colleague from DOJ who gave a speech here in Israel a couple of weeks ago, Makan Del Rahim, who said that these issues, that antitrust law should be our response to a lot of these digital issues and not other types of regulation.
Yeah, so I'm a believer that if we believe in open and competitive markets, that has a direct tie not only to economic transactions, but the consumption and production of vibrant ideas that may not necessarily be monetized. So it is why we care in democratic societies so much about communications, internet, and the ways in which we transmit information. So, I'll react to one thing, which is that I really appreciate what was just said about we want competition enforcement to be transparent. We want it to be based on analysis. We don't want it to look like there's the political agenda with it. But we also have to be very, very open about the limitations about how existing antitrust and competition policy does its analysis. I'm very, very concerned about the lack of rigor when it comes to how competition enforcers predict what the market will look like. And often when we look back on those predictions, we don't have a very good record. And the biggest concern I have is that when we really look at the data in the United States, and frankly across the OECD, but it's particularly pronounced in the United States, that the new firms that are formed in our economy has been on a decline for quite a bit of time. And in 2008, we actually saw firm formation be eclipsed by firm deaths. So we are actually seeing an economy that feels less dynamic and vibrant. And we do not have methods to measure the missing firms that have never been created. We don't have a metric to show what are all of the inventions that didn't come to play. And we reflect on Microsoft, the antitrust investigations. I think many of us are saying with increasing confidence that led to huge innovation and did not destroy Microsoft. Microsoft now has to compete fair and square on every single vertical that it's in. They can't use the dominance in one to advantage itself in the other, and that has made it stronger. That makes an economy stronger. I don't want to live in a society where government chooses the winners and losers, and government preferences certain companies, because that is not synchronous with a vibrant and open democracy. So we have to recognize the limitations of existing analytical frameworks in enforcing it, and frankly, the public, if they don't think that the competition enforcers and regulators are doing their job, they are clearly willing to express that in other ways politically. And I think you are going to continue to see throughout history in so many countries the anger from agricultural sectors to manufacturing sectors and consumer sectors and beyond, that they see government not acting and they take the matter into their own hands through their elected officials. So this might happen here. If antitrust can't solve what the public needs it to solve, they will use other tools. I mean, you mentioned that the toolkit might not be right, and there may be other things to do it. So, and I'll quickly react. My colleague at the Justice Department who talked about, the importance of competition enforcement and you don't need regulation. I mean, it ties into what I just said. If competition enforcement is not solving it, then, you know, citizens will legislate and regulate, and that is their prerogative.
Tehlia, so I think this is a good setup for you, and I want to ask, maybe in light of your challenge, you know, that, you know, these issues are very broad and all-encompassing, plus in light of the resources that these authorities, and specifically maybe the competition, also privacy authorities have. Let me put it this way, I'm sure Julie has at her disposal many more engineers and technologists than the FTC with its very small OTEC, is it called, unit in the Consumer Protection Bureau, and now the new task force on antitrust, and I'm not sure what the antitrust authority has in terms of, in Israel, in terms of engineers and technologists. Do we need a new regulator, a digital regulator for this new age?
I'm not sure. I think that the diversion is quite good in the sense. We need more cooperation between various regulatory authorities. But I think if we need to sum up, there is a responsibility here towards future generations. And this responsibility goes both ways. First of all, I would say a substantive responsibility because what the biggest platforms supply these days are first speech rights and then autonomy rights. Speech rights in the sense of social media and autonomy rights in the sense of targeted advertising and data collection and the ability to create those traps on our autonomy while using this data. That's one thing. The other thing, as you have mentioned correctly, if antitrust authorities are not going to get into play strongly now, there's going to be regulation. And regulation in other realms. And for example, content moderation regulation. And I can assure you this is not better. And it is not going to be better. It is going to have much, I would say, more negative externalities in this sense. So I think I want to stay here with the question whether asking ourselves about the price and free services that we get is the exact place where we need to be. For example, when you have mentioned the ability of two companies which collect data want to merge, and you say to yourself, I'm not sure I want to take this as a consideration or as a major consideration, but you have no idea within 5 years what they'll be able to do with this data. So in this sense, ignoring it and saying this is not a consideration, I think would be a little bit irresponsible. So and maybe so we have a market here of speech and of autonomy, and this should be, I think, the center of or the core issue. What we are afraid of is the lack of metrics. How do we measure pluralism of voices? How do we measure the harm to our autonomy which might be happening to, or I would say the negative potential to our democracy. So here again, I think we need to refer, for example, to media regulation authorities such as Ofcom at the UK. We have some body of knowledge about those metrics as well. We don't need to invent everything. Of course, we don't need to copy it as is. There's so many differences. But I'm just saying those questions were asked before. How exactly you deal with those dangers which are not purely economic but can harm our society as a whole. Well, is it better for antitrust authorities to deal with that than our politicians? I don't know. I guess it's going to be both. But I think each one of them need to take or to look at the bigger picture and not only the pricing issue.
Great. Thanks, Tehlia. I see some questions from the audience. So I see Yoram had a question, and then Jules had a couple of questions. And Asaf, do you want to ask a question? I think you want to ask a question. You're sure?
I have 2 comments and 1 question. 2 comments to Commissioner Chopra about the examples. The phone number example is an example of something that works on the price market but creates a terrible aspect on privacy, because now the phone number has become your ID number, And this is the outcome of this process, that this is now can be traced much easier than before. The second thing regarding the role of individuals, if you look at the history of what happened in privacy in the last 10 years, I think that individuals made the major change in privacy and not the learned discussion that was here. You look at Snowden, Max Schrems, and what's the name, McLister? The one that initiated this, Alistair, yeah, McTaggart, the one who initiated CCPA. So these are moves by individuals that really changed the landscape. Now, my question is to Michal, what is the relevance of a competition authority of an 8 million people country to this discussion?
I will say what I've said several times before. The competition authority is investing quite a lot of resources in understanding the digital platforms, in understanding what competition issues they raise, but we do not see ourselves as leading the global fight against competition harms that the digital platforms bring. We do think that if there are Israeli aspects, specific Israeli aspects to these issues, then these are things that we should tackle and that we should confront. And when we look into these issues, we usually try and look on the very specific Israeli aspect of them. So, for example, since Israel has quite a lot of high-tech industry and high-tech ecosystem, it's very important for us to understand how they will be influenced from the digital platform, whether they should look at it as an opportunity or whether they should look at it as an obstacle for their development and for their growth. So I think in these specific Israeli aspects, we should be involved and we should invest energies and resources on it, but we do not presume to lead the global issues in this arena.
Respectfully, if I can just add, I think I wouldn't agree with your characterization on the phone numbers. You're under the FCC's regulation. Consumers are still welcome to change their phone numbers. It is not tied to a unique ID. What I think you should, as we explore these intersections, I think it goes also beyond what you said about control. It's also about how we structure the marketplaces in order to allow the end consumer or the purchaser or whomever it might be in the supply chain the greatest ability to avoid lock-in. And I think that ultimately has a lot of benefits for both, price and non-price factors like quality, like privacy.
Add just one sentence with regard to what Michal just said. Imagine a situation where the biggest, let's say, credit card company in Israel wants to purchase the biggest ISP provider. That's it. It goes to, they want to merge. I mean, of course, it's more than important that even in I would say locally or in the small scale of Israel, such considerations would be taken into account.
Good. Commissioner Chopra, I want to jump into sort of the question of whether competition and how that would actually play out in the market for privacy. Your suggestion was that if there was more competition, since people want privacy, we'd have more privacy. At the same time, we see companies aggressively thinking that to compete and provide the services in today's digital world, machine learning, personalize this, personal that, they all want data. They want more data. They want as much data as possible. It seems clear that there is some competition going on around selling and sharing data and the walled garden sort of argument. And in fact, the big platforms generally say, well, we don't actually sell your data, but of course we use it in a very robust way. And it seems like every other company seems to want that data. You're a walled garden because you're not letting me get the data. The advertisers want the data. So isn't it will we really get more privacy if we have 20 Facebooks and 35, YouTubes? Are we likely to get people, since the drive to have data to do X, Y, Z with services seems to be, this powerful force? Won't we actually have more data sharing, more data swapping, more data sales because of this drive to provide services? So how do we know how this would actually play out? If you look at the market today, it seems that it might play out exactly the other way.
Well, we don't, and that's the beauty of markets, is that there is going to be competition on a number of different dimensions. The issue that we know in sector after sector after sector is when you suppress the salience of a quality indicator, there will not be much competition on it. So, when we talk about, there was a conversation earlier about generational differences, we also see in public opinion surveys that some swaths of society simply, they desire privacy, but just have surrendered. They said, I can't even actually operate in society unless I give everything away. So I think part of the issue is, how do you make certain indicators of a transactions more salient? This is not an antitrust issue. It's part of every single regulatory issue we deal with. It relates to consumer disclosures sometimes. It can relate to permissions and controls. But the bottom line is, when you suppress knowledge and give you and don't feel that users don't feel that that is an indicator that they can make choices on, there is not going to be a race to the top. When Facebook started 15 years ago, one of the major value propositions was, this is much more private than MySpace. And that, of course, was a huge attraction to many people. MySpace had been subject to very significant controversies because the amount of information that was broadcasted was being misused by criminals, by others who sought to cause harm. Because it was salient in people's mind and there was a clear discussion in the marketing, you're going to be able to control who sees your data. You're going to be able to limit where that information is going. That was a quality indicator. Now, of course, it's not going to stop the fact that companies are going to want to gain competitive advantages through aggregating, amassing, and analyzing data. And I think that is, I'm not taking this trade-off of data collection and data protection as being a binary. So I think it's a more textured discussion than that.
Great. Julie, everybody knows that on a panel that we are together, you get the final word. So you get the final word now.
Okay, so context. One time we were in Brussels and I had to publicly yell at Omer for failing to let me get a word in edgewise. So he's well trained now. Look, I just want to, what I would love to do is answer that last question, but then also I really want to do a +1 on something that Rohit said about sort of the prowess of competition authorities overall. Look, and I know you know this, Jules, for sure. Definitely there's a tension between data collection and data protection, and I love the poetry in that, so thank you. But there's no question as well that these platforms are competing on privacy vigorously. I hear that in the C-suite at Microsoft and all the conversation around privacy and how to compete on it better. And all you need to do is look at the commercials that Apple runs, these are not public service announcements that Apple is running. They are very effective, catchy commercials where they are focused on competing against other platform providers in mobile over the extent to which those other providers are less privacy protective than Apple will be. There is vigorous competition there. You also can listen to Tim Cook and what he says. There's no question that there is a lot of competition on privacy in a space that doesn't have a lot of players. One could call it an oligopoly, or even perhaps a duopoly, but they're still competing on privacy, which is super interesting. Well, one thing I just wanted to do a double underline on was something that Rohit said about the ability of competition regulators to truly predict the future, and the extent to which antitrust academics and thought leaders, at least in the United States, and I think elsewhere too, have too heavily relied on what we call type 1 errors. That is, errors where you stop a merger or an activity that will, at the end of the day, turn out to be pro-competitive because you had blinders you couldn't see, versus what's known as a type 2 error in the competition and economic world, where you allow something to go forward, but actually turns out to have been very anti-competitive, and you just couldn't tell. And I think one of the big problems that the competition and world is now facing in this particular space about predictability is the rules and the analysis about type 1 versus type 2 errors was created in a world where we had markets that were not really very dynamic. Manufacturing, I don't know, you could chemicals, whatever, just not very dynamic this side. But can you guys hear me okay? I can do my Ethel Merman voice. Okay. All right, here we go. Thank you. Thank you. See, he's so well trained. But that type of analysis, the fear of a type 2 error, and very much wondering, making sure that you don't commit a type 1 error, I think falls apart when you're in a very dynamic market where predictions are much, much harder. When I think back about my time on the Commission and some of the decisions that we made, which were joined by the European DG Comp, there was no distinction between the way we were analyzing some mergers with respect to Google, with respect to Apple, with respect to Facebook, right? Everybody agreed that these mergers should go forward, but when I think back about our inability to predict what those mergers would lead to, I think it was because of how dynamic the market is and how cloudy our crystal ball is. And I think that there's a real problem that the economists have created by leaning so heavily into a concern about type 1 errors over type 2 errors. And there's work being done, as we both know, by some academics to say, actually, the United States economy has suffered because of this bias against a type 1 error. And I think that there will be a correction there too. But I'm really echoing what you've already said, but putting it in the frame that I experienced when I was on the Commission, that everyone was so afraid of making a mistake by stopping something that might be pro-competitive. And I just think that in these dynamic markets, that's really hard to do these days.
And one real...
We need to terminate.
You have to train him.
I just wanted to thank you and everyone for putting this together. And I'll add to what Julie said, that if you care about making sure that there is a robust startup ecosystem here for a long time to come, you need to keep paying attention to this debate. Because if it goes the wrong way, that will have huge negative ramifications for this country and others.
That was like Tehlia's strategy, actually. Thank you very much for listening.